Hi there guys, welcome back to my channel. So today's video is going to take a little bit of a different format. We're going to try something new. I really want to be able to film longer videos for you guys because I know some people like to use them when they're sleeping or to get to sleep, so I'm working on that for you guys. So this week is going to be part one of my new story called By the Sword, and next week will be the second half. However, in the last half of the video we won't be having a story, but I'll read you the dictionary and hopefully that'll help you with your vocabulary and help you just get to sleep, because you don't really have to listen or active listen anyway. So I really hope you enjoy this week's video and thank you so much for watching. My leather boots thumped over the soft undergrowth as I soldiered on ahead amongst damp leaves. The machete in my right hand pinged its sharp edge against various twigs and members shooting from the ground. Sweat slid down my forehead and rolled around the edge of my eye socket, softly caressing my face. The feeling took over my mind for a second, reminding me why I was here tonight. Why I was trudging through a damp forest, why it had to be under the protective cover of darkness, and why there was a good chance I wouldn't make it to tomorrow alive. As I reached the edge of the tree line, my eyes fell upon a huge Gothic structure, complete with a moat and multiple armed guards. My chances of getting in or out undetected seemed to dwindle the longer I looked at it. Castle guards could smell misintention, I had come to learn. My armour and linen trousers were currently prohibiting me from the Damsel in Distress Act. Time to get creative. Looking into the water that surrounded the castle, I decided this would be my inn. The crags that followed down the edge of the water would most likely cover me on my way there, so I started off slowly, hoping that the colour of my navy get-up would provide me with some camouflage too. I walked, slightly crouching, down the steep hill. Every few minutes I spooked myself and hid behind a rock or a step in the peat. I finally made it down to the long grass at the edge of the glass-like water. I lay my body down flat, stomach first, and allowed myself to roll into the abyss below. The icy liquid braced my body as it seeped through to my skin through my apparel, and I kept myself afloat in the shallow water by paddling along the bottom with my hands. I could see the drawbridge up ahead of me, lit by flaming lanterns, and I could almost feel the heat from the blazes with my eyes. I passed under the bridge and pulled my torso up and out of the water for a moment as I considered my next step. There were 2 guards at the outside of the bridge on land. I reached up to grasp the splintering wood of the bridge and pulled myself up slightly to peep over it. Inside the gateway there were 2 more guards, in full metal armoury and a very, very tempting chain attached to the ground by a metal loop, holding the drawbridge up. My ears pricked up, and if I had a tail, it would have been wagging. As if I never saw the guards on the inside of the bridge, I decided I was going to try my luck. Under the cover of the wooden structure above, I took a second to breathe and formulate a plan. Here we go. I dug my nails into the soft bank that led back up to the bridge. My soaking clothes were weighing me down considerably. I placed both hands onto the wood and my body splatted onto its surface with a slap. This alerted both sets of guards on either side of the bridge. I scrambled up out of the wet puddle I had created and launched over to the chain on the other side. To my elation and surprise, it had been secured with rope where it was connected to the loop amongst the cobbles. The king was obviously trying to save money this year. 4 pairs of heavy boots belonging to heavy men thundered towards me from both angles. I waited for a few seconds. They shouted as they got closer. Amongst the chaos, I gathered my thoughts and took a breath. Gathering the handle of my machete inside my palm, I crouched down a little and waited. A royal welcome, I thought, as I launched out of my crouched position, slicing my machete through the rope holding down the chain in front of me, then through the jugulars of soldier 1, 2, and 3. Although I felt like taking a bow for this immaculate show of sport, the last disgruntled soldier ran towards me, flailing, after my blade had only tapped his helmet. I allowed him to fire towards me and drew up my blade, so it was between us when our bodies collided. I felt the impact of his overfed body bash into mine as the handle of my machete winded me considerably on impact. I slid my left hand onto his esophagus and made a fist as hard as I could. He slipped away and I removed my weapon from his gut. Blood splashed across the floor and he collapsed. The drawbridge had closed behind me as I stood in the gangway. There was a service door to my left, and although it would have given me wild satisfaction to use the main entrance this current time, I decided against it and scurried through the small entrance in the archway. Rats always seem to survive, I thought, as I tapped through the stone tunnel. Maybe this is why. The air in the tunnel was suffocating, hot and stuffy. My shoulders scraped along the jagged walls and I could hear the bustling of people in the distance. I could only hope that I wouldn't bump into any more undesirables. I mean, there is such a thing as too many cooks. My sword swung from my wrist by the orange leather strap. I came to the end of the winding corridor and slid into a step in the wall where there are baskets full of apples and various legumes. Apron-clad bodies whistled around the room under candlelight and buzzed like bees in a hive. I stepped backwards slightly and almost fell bottom first into a boulder-like mountain of potatoes. As I recovered from my near-death experience, I saw a small pair of feet shuffling into view, and a bright, confused pair of eyes looked into mine. I buried my weapon behind my thigh, in amongst my tunic. I pressed my lips together and waited expectantly for a scream or shudder, but she just stared. Her eyes searched across my clothing and fell on an emblem across the left-hand side of my chest. "Ma'am," she said, bowing slightly. I shook my head and nodded back. She took me by the hand and whipped me around into a closed-door larder. I personally just hoped she hadn't heard the rumours and expected to have some sort of come-to-Jesus moment with me. Ironically, we were now both standing in a closet. She started to remove her clothes and I stepped back so that my back pressed against the cold lime wall. "Oh no," she said, looking up at me pointedly. "You'll see. Give me yours." We exchanged each other's clothes and finally she pushed a white bonnet over my hair and tied it around my chin. The skirt was a little short and my black boots were exposed at the shin. I picked up my machete and slid it into the waistband of the skirt. She looked up at me proudly, shrouded in my tunic as though they were her father's clothes. Reaching out from my hand, she clasped her fingers around mine and simply said, "Good luck." I exited the small cupboard and passed through the flaming hot kitchen, and not a head was turned. I padded up a set of shallow, worn-out stairs. Through the bright threshold at the top, I could see chandeliers sparkling as they hung from the ceiling. When I got to the top, the light from a grand dining room illuminated my bonnet, shoulders and nose as they poked out from the cover of my linen hat. A dinner party roared on at the long wooden table ahead. I weaved through the hordes of servers and was almost at the far door when I caught sight of a pair of glaring eyes drilling through me at the top of the table. There he was, fearless leader of revolutions, installer of treachery, staring at me with red wine dribbling over his unshaven chin. I quickly darted my gaze away from his and bowed my head as I exited the door. The sounds of frivolity faded away behind me as I made my way through the entrance hall, under the cover of a balcony held up by pillars. I remember the route like the back of my hand. A small corridor jutted off in the left corner of the hallway, masked by the white ornamental wall carvings. I flitted through the little space and walked a little until I found myself at the foot of a worn, steep and dangerous-looking service staircase. The staff had used this staircase for years, and every mark of their weary step had brushed off on it. I started up them, wary that I could not be too careless, or I'd end up with a broken leg, and, most likely, a visit to some dungeon or prison. I tried to calm the small shots of adrenaline running through my arms to my fingertips, knowing that it would not be a mammoth struggle to get in, but it would be one trying to get out, with my cargo. I finally reached the top of the staircase and made the naive decision to look back down through the 4-story staircase to the bottom. My stomach lurched as I looked down the middle straight to the stone below. For a second, wondering if it would be safer for her if I would just go back down, I remembered the last thing she said to me when we spoke. "I breathe for you, Lillian." It was a chilling reminder to me of the responsibility it takes to love someone. The guards burst into the room after this admission and tore her from me, throwing a blunt instrument into my eye socket and putting me squarely to sleep. I woke up recoiling in burning pain, my body painful to every movement, and when I opened my good eye, I was covered in a brown muslin sheet that was foul-smelling. I woke up on something soft, but even to this day, I cannot allow myself to explore what that was. Wheels turned over an uneven surface below my body, and birds circled overhead. I was on a trailer to the Bass prison, where the dungeons had the tendency to fill up with ice-cold waves from the roaring sea outside, and the rats would probably kill you before the starvation. I kicked open the hatch at the end of the trailer with both feet and let my body fall out of the contraption and down into a ditch on the left-hand side of the road. Weightless like water, but I didn't have the wherewithal to move an inch due to pain. The thought of this experience spurred me on, faster to find Agnes amongst the endless corridor of rooms I had just reached. A few of the doors opened with complete ease, and I shut them on my way out in lieu of finding my prize. I peered my head around the corner to see another corridor with a large, decorated door at the end covered by 2 armed guards. The Queen had died many years before in wildly questionable circumstances whilst with the King on a horseback ride. Deigning to think what unfortunate happenchance took place on that day, I turned my thoughts to finding out if Agnes was in that room. What did servants do? I tried to search in my mind what unnecessary service I could be bringing her without any food or linens on my person. I started quietly down the corridor, trying to be as mousy as possible, and probably failing. As I reached the door, I didn't look up at either of the guards and simply said, "Turn down service for Her Royal Highness?" They took a beat to look at each other and stepped aside, opening the door for me. Once I wandered in, I realised that Agnes was not on the bed as I had expected, but in a side room that held all of her books and dresses. "Your Royal Highness?" I ventured, hoping at the very least she would recognise my voice. The nerves had kicked in and my body was alive with energy. Some good, and some bad. "Is that you, Jada?" she asked in a blank tone. She sounded tired. "No, ma'am," I said. She was cross-legged on the floor and her back bolted upright when I answered. Her blonde hair wrapped in a loose bun sat on her shoulders, and I could see that she was thinking something. Maybe she was getting scared. She stood up and slowly turned to me. I smiled back at her, waiting for her to realise who I was. A few emotions ran over her face and her eyes welled up as she ran over to me. Throwing her arms over my shoulders and jumping up onto me, as though she would get closer and grasp harder if she could, I could feel her chest jumping as she cried into me ever so quietly. The commotion was all silent as we kept it from the guards outside. She let me go for a second and put a hand on either side of my face and placed her forehead on mine. Both our eyes closed. We simply bathed in that feeling of peace and safety for a while. "I missed you," she whispered. I couldn't help but hold her again. I was enraged that she had been locked in here, kept away from the world, able to do not much else but miss me and feel alone. She swept her hand across my cheek and pressed her soft lips gently against mine. Every time she touched my skin, I felt alive, like she could heal wounds I was not even aware of. This time, I could not let her go. That feeling could not have scared me any more. I peeled my body away from hers and looked at her, realizing that she did not look as fearful as I felt. We need to leave, I said. I know, she replied, smiling and wandering over to the far corner of her room. She pulled out a bag and opened it on the bed. There was some food, clothes, and a set of nunchucks. We can work with that. How did you get these? I said as I picked up the nunchucks, trying to hold in a laugh. She snatched them from my hand and said, Never you mind. There was a hooded cape hanging from the wooden poster on her bed, and she picked it off its perch and swung it around her body, pulling the hood up over her face. Very fetching, I said, looking at her little proud face, and honestly feeling flattered that she had prepared to elope with me. Of course, we could never actually get married, but it wouldn't matter in the end. You'll have to raise an alarm, she said, determined and more knowledgeable about this place than I. Say that I'm sick, or I've fainted, and you don't know what to do. I nodded as I followed. Then we can just run out, lock them in behind us. I don't even think anyone needs to get hurt. Her naivety was charming, and I took my machete out from the servant girl's skirt. She looked at it slightly disappointed in my answer, but trusted me nonetheless. I braced myself to raise my most feminine cry, and she got down on the floor. My machete pressed against my farthest away thigh. I started, Your Royal Highness! Oh my! Help! Help! Please! There's something wrong with the princess! I heard the door unlock from the outside and both the guards came rushing in. One bent down beside the princess and looked at her intently. The other took one look and started running into the corridor. 1 out of 2 wasn't bad. What will we do? I worried with the guard. He's gone to get help. We need to get her onto the bed, he said in a gruff voice. The man was huge. Muscle bulged in between his armour, and I was honestly impressed. Time started to move in slow motion. I stood up above him and said, I can't let you do that, I'm afraid. Wielding my sword against his neck, he looked up at me, unafraid but helpless. I offered my free hand to Agnes and she grabbed it and stood behind me. We both looked down at him and he up at us. Get your bags, dear, I said. She whipped her bag up off the silken sheets and we both backed out the door, placing the lock back down quietly with him inside. That was easier than I thought. Meanwhile, we could hear heavy running footsteps emerging behind us. She directed us to run straight ahead and down a different small staircase to the one I had used earlier. Just as treacherous, we both slipped a few times, grasping onto each other as we hurried down the tight and dark enclosure. I looked over the edge and saw bodies hurrying up beneath us. They're coming, I said, and she grabbed my hand and we squeezed through a little threshold. It goes into the dining room, she mouthed, both of us knowing that her father was there tonight. I squeezed our hands together in solidarity and pulled us both towards the exit. On our arrival to the dining room, the party was roaring louder than before. Old men spluttered and screamed and laughed in an uncouth version of the Last Supper. So that was the end of this week's story. And now I'm going to go ahead and read some of the dictionary so that we can work on our vocabulary together. This week we're going to be reading letter A. Aardvark. A nocturnal mammal of southern Africa, with a long snout and a tongue that feeds on termites. Aaron's rod. Any of several tall plants, especially the great mullein. A. B. a human blood type of the ABO system. Abacus, an oblong frame with rows of wires or grooves along which beads are slid, used for calculating. Abaft, in the stern half of the ship. Abalone, mollusk of the genus Haloitis, with a shallow shell lined with mother of pearl. Abandon, give up completely or before completion. Forsake or desert, give up to another's control or mercy. Abase, humiliate or degrade. Abash, embarrass or disconcert. Abate, make or become less strong, severe. Or squash, to put an end to. Abattoir, slaughterhouse. Abbacy, the office, jurisdiction, or period of office of an abbot or abbess. Abbatial, of an abbey, abbot, or abbess. Abbess, a woman who is the head of certain community of nuns. Abbey, 1. The building occupied by a community of monks or nuns. 2. The community itself. Abbot, a man who is the head of an abbey or monks. Abbreviate, to shorten. Abbreviation, an abbreviated form, especially of a word or phrase. 2. The process or result or abbreviating. Abdicate, give up or renounce. Abdomen, the part of the body containing the stomach, bowels, and reproductive organs. Abduct, carry off or kidnap, illegally by force or deception. Abeam, on a line at right angles to the middle of a ship's or an aircraft's length. Abed, in bed. Abel, the white poplar, Populus alba. Aberdeen Angus, an animal of a Scottish breed of hornless black beef cattle. Aberdonian, of Aberdeen, a native or citizen of Aberdeen. Aberrant, departing from an accepted standard or normal type. Aberration, a departure from what is normal or expected or regarded as right. 2. A moral or mental lapse. 3. The failure of rays to converge at one focus because of a deficit in lens or mirror. Abet, to encourage or assist. Abeyance, temporary disuse or suspension. ABH, actual bodily harm. Abhor, regard with disgust or hatred. Abhorrence, 1. Disgust, detestation. 2. A detested thing. Abhorrent, inspiring disgust, repugnant, hateful, detestable. Abide, 1. Tolerate or endure. 2. Act in accordance with. 3. Obedience. Abiding, enduring and permanent. Ability, capacity or power. 2. Cleverness, talent, or mental power. Abject. 1. Miserable or wretched. 2. Degraded, self-abasing, humble. 3. Despicable. Abjection. A state of misery or degradation. Abjure. Renounce on oath. Ablative. The case of nouns and pronouns indicating an agent, instrument, or location. Ablot. A change in vowel in related words or forms arising from differences of accent and stress in the parent language, i.e. in sing, sang, or sung. Ablaze. 1. On fire. 2. Glittering, glowing, radiant. Able. 1. Having the capacity or power. 2. Clever, skillful. Abled. Having a full range of physical or mental abilities, or able-bodied. Ableism. Discrimination in favour of able-bodied people. Ablution. 1. The ceremonial washing of parts of the body or of sacred vessels, etc. 2. The ordinary washing of the body. Ably. Capably, cleverly, competently. ABM. Anti-ballistic missile. Abnegate. 1. Give up or deny oneself. 2. Renounce or reject. Abnormal. Deviating from what is normal or usual, exceptional. Abnormality. 1. An abnormal quality or occurrence. 2. The state of being abnormal. Aboard. 1. On or into a ship, aircraft, or train. 2. Alongside. Abode. Habitual residence, a house or a home. Abolish. Put an end to, a custom or institution. Abolition. The act or process of abolishing or being abolished. Abolitionist. A person who favours the abolition of, especially, capital punishment or formally, slavery. Abominable. 1. Detestable, loathsome, or morally reprehensible. 2. Very bad or unpleasant. Abominable snowman. An unidentified man-like or bear-like animal said to exist in the Himalayas, a yeti. Abominate. Detest or loathe. Abomination. 1. An object of disgust. 2. An odious or degrading habit or act. 3. Loathing. Aboriginal. 1. Inhabiting or existing in a land from the earliest times or from before the arrival of colonists. 2. Of the Australian Aboriginals or their languages. Abound. 1. To be plentiful. 2. To teem or be infested. About. On the subject of, in connection with, relating to, in relation to, so as to affect. 2. At a time, near. 3. In, round or surrounding. 4. Here and therein. 5. At a point or points near to. 6. Carried with. 7. Occupied with. About turn. 1. A turn made so as to face the opposite direction. 2. A change of opinion or policy.